Country music has always been about honesty. It's about telling the truth, even if that truth is messy, uncomfortable, or hard to hear. Few artists lived that belief more fiercely than David Allan Coe. His life was not just about music. It was about survival, rebellion, and a deep need to be heard. He didn't come into the world with privilege or easy opportunities. He fought his way through prison cells, rejection, and hardship to carve out a place in country music history. When fans talk about the outlaw era of country, they often bring up names like Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, and Johnny Cash. These men stood against the polished, controlled world of Nashville music in the 1970s. They wanted to sing songs that reflected real lives and real pain. David Allan Coe fit perfectly into that story, maybe too perfectly. Unlike many of his peers, his outlaw image wasn't just a stage act. He had lived it. Every scar, every mistake, and every wild rumor tied back to a life he actually endured. From the very beginning, David carried a reputation for being both gifted and unpredictable. Some people admired him for saying what others wouldn't dare. Others criticized him for crossing lines and never apologizing. He was praised as a songwriter who could touch the soul one moment and condemned as a performer who shocked audiences the next. He lived on that edge where art and controversy met, and he never seemed interested in stepping away. The story of David Allan Coe matters because it's not a clean success story. It's not a tale of a man who rose to fame without struggle. It's the story of someone who came from the lowest point society could place a person in, a childhood without stability, years behind bars, and a reputation that scared people away before they even heard him sing. And yet, through sheer force of will, he became a part of American music history. His biggest songs made people laugh, cry, and sometimes shake their heads. "You Never Even Called Me by My Name" became one of country's most beloved sing-along anthems, even though it started as a joke. His raw ballads like "Would You Lay With Me in a Field of Stone" showed his softer side, a side often hidden beneath his hard, outlaw image. Other songs pushed limits so far that radio stations refused to play them. He became a lightning rod, the kind of artist you couldn't ignore. What makes David Allan Coe's life so fascinating is not just the music. It's the way his personal story was woven into everything he did. Fans never knew what to expect from him. He might show up to a show dressed in rhinestones like a rock star, or he might ride a motorcycle onto the stage as if he had just escaped from the open road. He challenged the norms of what a country artist was supposed to look like or sound like. At the same time, behind the public image, there was a man searching for something deeper. His songs often revealed loneliness, regret, and longing for love. Even in his wildest performances, you could sense there was more to him than just the tough, outlaw shell. People who knew him personally often spoke about his kindness, even when the public only saw the controversy. As we walk through his story, we'll see both sides: the outlaw who lived life without rules, and the songwriter whose words carried a heavy kind of truth. His journey is filled with highs that made him a legend and lows that nearly destroyed him. He had moments of triumph where fans cheered his name, and moments where the music industry seemed ready to shut its doors on him forever. This is not just a story about music. It's about what happens when a man decides to live on his own terms, no matter the cost. Some admired him, some condemned him, yet all of them had to admit that he left a mark. David Allan Coe's story is one that asks us bigger questions. What price do we pay for freedom? How much of our past defines us? And how much can we rewrite through music, through art, through persistence? These questions hang over his legacy. Whether you love him or not, his place in country music cannot be erased. In the chapters ahead, we'll go back to the early years when David was not yet a singer, but a boy already fighting against the world. We'll see how music became his escape, his weapon, and his salvation. We'll look at the moments where he rose high, the controversies that followed him, and the ways he reinvented himself again and again. And finally, we'll reflect on the legacy he leaves behind, one that is still debated, still alive, and still inspiring conversations decades later. David Allan Coe's life is not simple. It is not neat. It is not the kind of story that wraps up with a bow. Instead, it's the story of a man who lived fully, sometimes recklessly, but always with a song on his lips. And that's why his story still matters today. Every artist's story begins somewhere, but for David Allan Coe, the beginning was far from easy. He was born in Akron, Ohio, in 1939, during a time when the world was facing war and hardship. His family didn't have much money, and his home life was unstable. From a young age, David was left to figure out the world on his own. Unlike children who grew up with structure and support, he often found himself in trouble. He didn't have the kind of safety net that might have guided him toward a steady path. Instead, he was pushed into a cycle of mistakes that would shape the rest of his life. By the time most kids his age were just starting school, David was already dealing with problems far beyond his years. He was placed in reform schools as a teenager, places meant to correct young offenders, but often filled with violence and neglect. These institutions left deep marks on him. Instead of feeling rescued, he often felt hardened. The lessons he carried out of those halls weren't just about rules. They were about survival. He learned that trust was rare and freedom had to be fought for. As he got older, his struggles only grew heavier. David spent much of his young adult life in and out of prison. He was locked up for crimes like robbery and auto theft. Each time he was released, it seemed the world outside had no place for him. Without real opportunities, he fell back into old patterns and landed behind bars again. It was a cycle that nearly defined his life. Prison was harsh, but it was also where David found one of the most important parts of himself: music. Surrounded by concrete walls and steel bars, he began to write songs. For him, music became both a lifeline and a way to express the pain he carried. He played for other inmates, sharing songs that were raw, emotional, and honest. In those moments, he began to see that music could be more than just a pastime. It could be his way out, but finding his voice didn't erase the challenges. David's reputation as an ex-convict followed him everywhere. When he talked about chasing a music career, most people didn't take him seriously. The music industry was already tough for newcomers, and for someone with his background, it seemed almost impossible. Record executives wanted polished, safe performers who could fit neatly into Nashville's idea of country music. David Allan Coe was the opposite. He was unpredictable, rough around the edges, and carried the weight of a past that many considered unforgivable. Still, there was something in him that wouldn't quit. Each rejection only pushed him to keep going. He believed his songs mattered because they told the truth about the kind of life many people didn't want to acknowledge. For David, it wasn't about fitting in. It was about standing out, even if that meant standing alone. Those early years were filled with small steps forward and long setbacks. He lived out of his car at times, traveling from town to town, hoping someone would give him a chance to play. He faced closed doors, suspicious looks, and nights where survival came before music. Yet he kept writing. Every heartbreak, every lonely night, and every reminder of his past fueled his songs. David's struggle years were about more than poverty or rejection. They were about a man wrestling with himself, with the weight of his mistakes, and the desire to be more than just a headline about crime. He wanted to be remembered for his voice, not his record. He wanted to prove that even someone who had been locked away and cast aside could rise up and make an impact. Looking back, these years set the stage for everything that came later. They gave him a toughness that no industry rejection could break. They gave his songs a depth that only comes from lived experience, and they gave him a hunger for recognition that would drive him to take risks others avoided. By the time David Allan Coe finally broke through, he had already lived a lifetime of battles. His music wasn't an act. It was the truth of a man who had seen the darkest corners of life and still believed he could sing his way into a different future. After years of wandering, rejection, and time behind bars, David Allan Coe's story began to change when he decided to chase music with everything he had. In the late 1960s, he left Ohio and headed to Nashville, Tennessee, the center of country music. He didn't arrive with a polished image or a record deal. He came with little more than determination, a handful of songs, and the belief that music was his way out of the life that had nearly destroyed him. At first, Nashville wasn't kind to him. The city was filled with talented writers and performers, all hoping for the same dream. Many of them had clean images and connections within the industry. David had neither. What he did have, though, was a raw honesty in his songs that caught people's attention. He wasn't writing about fairy tales or polished love stories. He was writing about real people, real heartbreak, and the darker sides of life that others avoided. His first big break didn't come from performing, but from songwriting. David wrote songs that were picked up by other artists and that made people in Nashville start to notice him. One of the most important early wins came when Tanya Tucker recorded his song, "Would You Lay With Me in a Field of Stone?" Released in 1973, the song became a massive hit, reaching #1 on the country charts. For David, this was proof that his words could reach far beyond the walls of any prison or honky-tonk bar. The success of that song changed everything. Suddenly, record labels couldn't ignore him anymore. He was no longer just a troubled ex-con trying to play guitar. He was a songwriter whose work was topping the charts. That success opened the door for him to step into the spotlight as a performer. He signed with Columbia Records and released his first albums, which showcased not only his writing, but also his unique voice and style. His debut records, including Penitentiary Blues in 1969 and later The Mysterious Rhinestone Cowboy in 1974, introduced audiences to a man unlike anyone else in country music. On stage, David often dressed in rhinestones and flashy outfits, combining country tradition with a bold, almost rock and roll flair. This mix made him stand out instantly. Some thought he was strange. Others thought he was brilliant. Either way, people were talking about him. And in the crowded world of Nashville, that was half the battle. Then came the song that would forever be tied to his name, "You Never Even Called Me By My Name." Written by Steve Goodman and John Prine, the song was passed along to David, who recorded it in 1975. At first, it seemed like just another country tune, but the song's final verse, the perfect country and western song verse, turned it into a classic. With its mix of humor and heart, it became a sing-along anthem. Fans across America embraced it, and for the first time, David Allan Coe wasn't just a songwriter behind the curtain. He was a star on stage, leading crowds in one of the most famous country songs of the era. This was his true breakthrough moment. The song gave him the exposure he needed and cemented his place in the outlaw country movement. Unlike polished Nashville stars, David carried an edge that felt real. He wasn't pretending to be an outlaw. He had lived that life, and that authenticity, combined with his ability to deliver songs that were both moving and entertaining, made him impossible to ignore. Still, even in his breakthrough, controversy followed him. Some radio stations hesitated to play his music, worried about his reputation. Some audiences weren't sure what to make of his style. But for every critic, there were fans who loved him precisely because he was different. They saw in David Allan Coe a man who didn't try to hide where he came from. He wore his past openly and turned it into art. By the mid-1970s, David had gone from a man sleeping in cars and playing for spare change to a recognized voice in country music. His breakthrough wasn't just about one song or one record. It was about proving that someone with his background could break through barriers and be heard. His songs were now reaching millions, and his performances were starting to fill venues. For David Allan Coe, the long years of struggle were beginning to pay off. But success would also bring new challenges. As his career rose, so did the pressures of fame, the weight of expectations, and the controversies that would follow him for decades to come. By the mid-1970s, David Allan Coe had done what few thought possible. He had climbed out of the shadows of prison and rejection and carved out a place in country music. His breakthrough gave him a platform, but it was in the years that followed that he truly rose to fame. This was the period when he became a central figure in the outlaw country movement, a man who drew crowds, stirred controversy, and left behind songs that still echo today. The outlaw country movement was more than just music. It was a cultural pushback against the polished, carefully managed sound of Nashville. Fans were tired of hearing the same safe stories sung in the same safe way. They wanted something raw, something that spoke to real life. Artists like Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, and Johnny Paycheck were already leading the charge. But David Allan Coe brought a different kind of energy. He wasn't just singing about being an outsider, he truly was one. His records during this time captured both sides of his talent. On one hand, he released light-hearted, sing-along songs like "You Never Even Called Me by My Name," which had audiences laughing and joining in every night. On the other hand, he wrote deeply emotional ballads that revealed a softer, almost fragile side. Songs like "Would You Lay With Me in a Field of Stone" showed that behind the outlaw image was a man capable of writing love songs with haunting beauty. This balance made him stand out. He could make fans cheer one moment and cry the next. Live performances became the heartbeat of his rise. David Allan Coe was unpredictable on stage, and that unpredictability drew people in. He might ride a motorcycle onto the stage, covered in tattoos and dressed in rhinestones, creating an image that was equal parts country and rock. Crowds loved the sense that anything could happen. His concerts felt more like events than simple shows. Fans who saw him live walked away with stories to tell, and word spread quickly that David Allan Coe wasn't just another country singer, he was an experience. During this time, he also became closely associated with some of the biggest names in country. He performed with Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson, joining them in the outlaw country family. He also connected with George Jones and other legends who respected his songwriting ability. Though his rough past kept some at a distance, others admired his honesty and saw him as a true outlaw voice that couldn't be manufactured. Commercially, the mid to late 1970s were strong years for him. His albums sold well, and his songs became staples of jukeboxes and honky-tonks across the country. Tracks like Long-Haired Redneck and The Ride helped define his outlaw image while proving his storytelling ability. The Ride especially became one of his most enduring songs. It told the eerie tale of a hitchhiker who picks up a mysterious driver that might just be the ghost of Hank Williams. Fans were captivated by the story, and it cemented Coe's reputation as a songwriter who could take risks and deliver something unforgettable. He wasn't just successful with his own voice either. Other artists continued to record his songs, keeping his work on the charts even when he wasn't the one singing. That steady stream of recognition showed just how far he had come from the days when no one believed in him. What also made David Allan Coe stand out during his high point was his refusal to conform. While Nashville tried to polish artists into safe packages, Coe leaned into his outsider status. He wore flashy outfits, often rhinestone-studded, earning him the nickname the Mysterious Rhinestone Cowboy, before Glenn Campbell made that phrase famous. His look confused some, but it also made him unforgettable. He didn't want to blend in. He wanted to force people to pay attention, and during these years, it worked. Fan reactions to Coe in the 1970s and early 1980s were powerful. He built a loyal base that loved him not just for his music, but for the way he lived out his songs. He wasn't singing about being a rebel as an act. His whole life had been one long rebellion. That authenticity resonated with people who felt ignored by mainstream culture. He gave a voice to those who lived on the edge, who didn't see themselves reflected in polished Nashville stars. Critics, of course, were divided. Some praised his creativity and ability to move between humor and heartbreak with ease. Others dismissed him as too rough, too controversial, or too unpredictable. But that split reaction only fueled his rise. In music, especially in country, being loved by some and disliked by others often means you're making an impact, and David Allan Coe was making an impact. By the time the 1980s arrived, he had firmly established himself as one of the leading outlaw figures. His songs were being sung across America, his concerts were packed, and his reputation for better or worse was bigger than ever. He had gone from sleeping in cars to sharing stages with legends. He had transformed from an unknown ex-convict to a man whose name was known in homes, bars, and arenas across the country. These were the high points of his career, the years when it seemed like nothing could slow him down. But as with many artists who climbed to great heights, success also brought new challenges. Controversy, criticism, and personal struggles would soon follow, shaping the next chapter of his life in ways both dramatic and painful. David Allan Coe's story is one of the most unusual in country music, but much of it lives somewhere between truth and rumor. Born in Ohio in 1939, he grew up without much stability and spent much of his youth in reform schools and prison. Many of the stories told about him come from those years, and even he sometimes added to the legend with his own words, leaving people unsure of where the line between fact and fiction really is. What is clear is that prison was where he began to write songs, and music became his way of expressing a life that had been marked by rejection and hardship. When he finally made his way to Nashville in the late 1960s, he was far from the clean-cut stars the city liked to promote. He had tattoos, a rough past, and an outsider's image, and that made the industry hesitant to embrace him. Yet, his talent as a songwriter couldn't be denied. Tanya Tucker's recording of his song, "Would You Lay With Me in a Field of Stone," reached #1 in 1973, proving that his words carried weight. From there, Coe began to gain attention as both a writer and performer, eventually signing with Columbia Records and releasing albums that mixed heartfelt ballads with rebellious, edgy material. His breakout moment as a singer came with "You Never Even Called Me by My Name," a tongue-in-cheek anthem that became a sing-along classic. That song, combined with his unique stage presence, sometimes riding a motorcycle on stage, sometimes dressing in rhinestones as the mysterious rhinestone cowboy, made him impossible to ignore. His rise coincided with the outlaw country movement, led by names like Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings, and Coe fit in naturally with their pushback against Nashville polish. Songs like Long-Haired Redneck and The Ride deepened his outlaw image and gave him credibility with fans who felt left out of mainstream culture. At the same time, Coe's reputation grew more complicated. Some fans loved his unpredictability, while others saw him as too controversial. Radio stations sometimes refused to play his songs, and critics often debated whether his wild stories were true or self-made myths. Even today, much of what is said about him is hard to verify, because Coe himself often blurred the lines between fact and fiction. He told stories of time on death row, of run-ins with famous names, and of experiences that gave him his outlaw status. But historians and reporters have never been able to confirm them fully. In this way, Coe built not only a career, but also a legend, one where the reality is tangled with rumor. His concerts in the 1970s and 1980s drew large crowds, and fans often said you never knew what would happen when Coe took the stage. Some nights he might sing tender ballads that revealed deep emotion, and other nights he might shock the audience with wild behavior. This unpredictability kept him in the spotlight, but also fed the idea that his career was as much about myth as music. While his peers like Willie and Waylon were celebrated as icons, Coe remained a figure who was both admired and questioned. To his loyal fans, he was the ultimate outlaw, someone who had lived the hard life others only sang about. To his critics, he was a man who exaggerated his past and used shock value to keep attention. The truth probably sits somewhere in between. What cannot be denied, though, is that his songs touched millions. His writing gave country music some of its most lasting pieces, and his presence in the outlaw movement helped shape the era. Whether the wildest stories about him are fact or rumor, David Allan Coe's journey stands as one of the most remarkable in the history of American music, proof that sometimes the myth of an artist becomes just as important as the reality.